Kia ora and welcome to the Creative Matters podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with New Zealand artists. I'm your host, Mandy Yarkich. These conversations are intimate, uplifting and insightful. The guests on this show have absolutely enriched my life, and I'm sure their stories will have the same effect on you. Thank you so much for joining me to listen to these amazing people speak about what drives them, the way they work, and their personal takes on life. Hi, and welcome back to Creative Matters. This week I'm speaking with Scott Lawrie. Scott is an art lover, writer, entrepreneur, and the owner and director of the Scott Lawrie Gallery in Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland. The Scott Lawrie Gallery aims to connect hearts and minds when it comes to encountering and experiencing contemporary art. They proudly show a range of emerging, mid-career and internationally renowned artists from around the world, with a focus on New Zealand, Australia and the wider Moana region.
You know, the work that can be hung anywhere, right? I can put the work in my kitchen, I can put it in the gallery, I can put it in here, I can put it in an institution. Now, the context of where you're showing it changes the perception of that work and how it's perceived and how it's valued. I'm really interested in that. I'm really interested in the transmogrification that happens when you take a painting that you've done in your studio and you lean it against the wall and then you put it up in the gallery. Why is it suddenly culturally more important?
I ask him the tough questions that I'm sure every artist would like to know, from whether he thinks a dealer gallery is the holy grail for every artist and how to approach a gallery, to dealing with rejection and NFTs. I'm sure you're going to enjoy meeting Scott and hearing his amazing story. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning.
It's very lovely to meet you.
And you.
Thank you so much for coming out here.
Aye, it's a beautiful drive and it's a beautiful spot. Well done. I think you've done a terrific job in here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely a labour of love and a little passion project with me and my husband. So, welcome to Muriwai and welcome to Creative Matters.
Thank you.
I know how busy you are, so really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Busy with the art fair. Art fair's coming up and that's a full-on job. That's going to be 12 hours a day next week.
Really?
But very exciting. Yeah, it's the biggest event in this part of the world. So it draws in about 10,000 people from all the big collectors in New Zealand. And you get access to everybody's VIP list. So I'm getting collectors walking through that I would never normally get to experience the work of the gallery. So that's a big thing for us. Very exciting.
Yeah,
but this is more exciting.
Absolutely.
I'm even more thrilled. This is lovely and relaxing.
So, Scott, you're a very interesting person. I know you've had a fascinating life, and I've heard amazing things about you from lots of different people.
Oh, shucks. Nothing like a bit of pressure.
Can you tell us about your childhood and where you were born and where you went to from there?
So I was born in Edinburgh in 1970. Actually, the other week I worked out when I was conceived, and I think it was the night of the moon landings, because I was born on April the 6th, 1970. And if you go to Google and check out the night you were conceived, there was a rather more modest launch happening in the southern suburbs of Edinburgh at that time in Mordenvale View. And I was born the following April. So I was born in Edinburgh in a suburb called Morden. And Morden's on the southeast fringe of Edinburgh. And it's a housing estate, what you'd call state housing. And I was the youngest of 5 kids, and there were 7 of us in the house. Now this house, very typical sort of Coronation Street house with high-rise flats, we used to call them. So that was when there was an exercise in modernism, actually, in the 60s and 70s, where they would do these sort of vertical villages. That was the utopian ideal. What actually came out was substandard, shitty housing in high-rise blocks. So there was 6 of those, and Mum lived in a little row of houses in front of the top 2. So it wasn't the best childhoods. It was a really tough childhood. You know, my father was an alcoholic, and he was an ex-army guy, worked for the coal trucks for a while, like my grandfather did. And then he became a carpet fitter. Mum was a cleaner and a dinner lady. So that's what she did all her life. She had 5 kids, and I was the baby. So there was 5 kids. I was the youngest, and there was 2 years apart from each of us to the eldest kid. So 7 of us in this little state house in front of the high-rise flats, in this sort of suburb. How I ended up in art, I will never know. But I actually theorised quite a lot about that, and I think it was an escape. I think if you're a working class kid, you know, you're not going to escape that background on an economic level naturally. You're going to be at a disadvantage to begin with. The opportunities that middle class and wealthy kids get that come their way are going to be a lot more. The ratio is going to be a lot higher than what you're going to get as a working class kid. So art and sport are really good ways to sort of get out, you know, if you've got a modicum of talent. And what was really interesting for me in my relationship for art was I did see it as an escape from that background. You know, you're witness to a lot of things. My dad being an alcoholic, he had a lot of mental health issues. And in a tiny little house, 78 square meters, with 7 people living in it, there's not a lot of escape. So art became a form of my escape. And I was encouraged by my high school teacher, Jim Dale, his name was, and he was a terrific teacher. He opened up possibilities for me through art that I didn't realise could have existed. You know, suddenly I had this portal. And I talk a lot about art as a portal. When you view art as a portal through time and a portal through space, I think, to an emotional connection or a perspective to another human being. And that's good because it kind of typifies escape. It allows you to go somewhere else. It allows you to see the world through separate eyes. So if you've got this background, if you're in this house where there's not a lot of money, there's a lot of social issues, there's a lot of drugs and alcohol around, art offers a terrific escape from that.
Escape, yeah. And it's at high school, were you starting to make work of your own?
I had always been quite artistic. I mean, Mum tells this really interesting story where I was 5 or 6 years old and we were all told to draw a tiger. And I drew my tiger face on as if he was going to pounce out the frame. And Mum said, you know, she says the art teacher was really mesmerised by this. She says, because kids usually do the tigers on their sides.
So true.
And she says, and this, and I was quite intrigued by that. But no, I'd always enjoyed the practice of art. I mean, I was never that great. I was colourblind, which is, and I don't tell many people that. In fact, this is probably the first time I've said it publicly because you don't want to run an art gallery when you're colourblind. And anyway, eventually that encouragement through high school eventually ended up with me creating a portfolio to get into Edinburgh College of Art. So I did my first undergraduate degree there, my honours degree there, as a painter and a printmaker. And then after that, I did 3 years for a Master of Philosophy in Art. So I took it more into the theoretical side. Wow. And then that gave me a particular level of escape. And then I felt very free. I cut the umbilical cord then to Morden.
Yes. And so where did you head from there? Were you kind of desperate to head to London, or what was your goal?
It's interesting. I looked, my art teacher at the time, I said, what are the good art schools, you know? And he said, well, Chelsea's quite good. So I toddled off on the bus. I did the overnight bus down to Chelsea and got an option to study there. But the reason I ended up in Edinburgh, because I just thought, well, friends and family are there. But I definitely wanted to move out of the house. So I got student digs and chose Edinburgh. And which is a good training because Edinburgh is a very formal training. They're very unlike the art schools now, which are, you know, find your idea and then find a method to execute that idea against. Whereas Edinburgh, and to a lesser extent Glasgow, but still in the same kind of European tradition, is you had no permission to do anything abstract. You had to draw from the life cast, you had to do anatomy classes, you drew Greek and Roman sculpture.
Really?
Yeah, you tried anything new and they would say, you've not earned the right to do that. You're running before you can walk. So, and that traditional training comes in so it's so useful when you're running an art gallery, because it allows you to read works. It allows you to differentiate between the thing you're looking at and gauge it somehow. If I showed you a painting, if I showed any of your listeners a painting, 2 or 3 paintings, I say, tell me the difference between them. How are you reading these works? Hopefully a few of them would say, well, compositionally, that one is stronger than that one, or their use of materials in this one is much better, and here's why. So you've got to be able to answer those questions as a gallerist, I think, when you're talking about the work. After art school, I couldn't get a job. I'd been there for 7 years, had massive debts. I studied law at Edinburgh University. And during my study, my friend got a job in an ad agency, and it was really the advertising part of that. I escaped. I jumped out of law, went into advertising, and that took me around the world. And I came back to art many years later, but I'd always collected and everything.
And why do you think, how did the actual collection of artwork start?
Well, there's a real tension when you start to collect art, because you suddenly think, well, I've become the petty bourgeois people that I've hated since I was young. Art tends to be a very middle-class pursuit. Most amazing collectors, most fantastic collectors tend to have great wealth and not always great taste. They are told what to buy. That's endemic, by the way. That's endemic across just because you've got money to spend on something does not mean you have your own taste. You're often told what to buy. There's very, very few people actually that can go out there and really critique a work. The brand positioning of the gallery is to connect hearts and minds. And that's really important, because the heart part that you mentioned, the subjective part, this is how I feel about this piece, that's really unique. And that's really important when you look at a work and you go, oh, that's speaking to me in a way. One of the terrific and beautiful mysteries of art is, why does something speak to some people and not others? Something to do with your life story, I guess, or my life story, or that person's life story.
Yeah, what you're connecting to.
But the other balance to that, the counterbalance to that, and it's quite important, is the minds part, which is, what in this painting, either on a formal level, that is how you read it, what I mentioned earlier on, compositionally, through style, through place, where would you place this in art history? Is it a part of a movement? That rational part is quite important. Is people want to know that as well. As you look at something, you go, oh, I love that. And then I think my job as a gallerist is to sort of help you understand why it's relevant to the culture that we're living in at this moment in time. So you do the heart part, I feel this way, and you do the head part, which is here's why it's relevant or interesting.
That's so interesting. And so what would you recommend artists do, or, how do you think artists should approach their making with that in mind?
They need to make and leave that other part to other people. You can sense art that's self-conscious, and there's a lot of it around. One of the saddest parts about the New Zealand art world is there's a lot of galleries, there's a lot of people in the arts, and what they do is they intentionally create mystery around the artwork. They are intentionally trying to build something around it. Always feels really self-conscious to me. There's it's not so much that they're using gimmicks or trying to hide things. It's just the way they're presented. They're sort of manipulated. They're talked about in such a way that they're slightly baffling. If you look at art texts in this country, there are very, very few good art writers in New Zealand. New Zealand, out of all the countries I've lived in, and I've lived in 4, the standard of art writing in this country is abysmal. And that is because the young people coming through are particularly guilty of this, is they see very obtuse texts, and they therefore think that, they're not going to write about the artwork in a way that tries to explain it or tries to bring people into it. What they try and do, and it always pisses me off, is they try and go, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write an essay around this artwork based on the same theme. So the form of my essay is going to somehow blur the edges of this artwork, as opposed to looking at it critically and say, well, this is why it's interesting, or this is why it's relevant. And I cannot stand that type of art writing. And they use all these weird words, these buzzwords. After art school, I went into advertising and I worked as a language specialist for 25 years. I don't tell that to a lot of people. I worked in language, and it was real cutting edge language research. And what we would do, so for example, big companies would come to me and say, what role do emojis have in our everyday life? Should we allow emojis to come into our communication spectrum? So they were asking, and I'd have to go away and research that and come back and present to the board and say, this is where language is at the moment. And then you come back into the art world, and I can sniff the bullshit a mile away.
Yeah.
There is an awful lot of smoke and mirrors bullshit in art language, and it needs to stop. It does not make, they think that clarity and simplicity are somehow old-fashioned.
Yeah.
And clarity and simplicity is what's needed most in art, because otherwise we're making it irrelevant to everybody. Art is dying.
That's right. And yeah, what you're saying about being irrelevant to people, I just think a lot of how a lot of people feel they can't access art, or they can't get it, or, it doesn't make sense to them. I think a lot of that is down to the language that is connected with artwork.
Absolutely. Art is dying, and the people in art are the people responsible for its death. There's this really interesting thing when you hear the institutions talk, the taxpayer-funded institutions and the taxpayer-funded curators in them. And they stand up and say all this great kind of lip service to what's happening in the arts, but I think they fail on a fundamental level of communication. Some people do it very, very well. And accessibility. They don't make it easy. How many art galleries have you walked into? Even within my sector, how many art galleries have you walked into? And somebody's behind a white desk in a white room with very stark lighting, and they'll tap on the keyboard, or they'll come up to you in a black dress or a black suit, and they'll say, "Are you okay? Hello. How are you? You okay there?" And you go, "Yep, just having a look, thanks." You go, "Okay, well, just ask me if you need to know anything, and thanks very much." And they go back and sit behind their computer and tap into it. I think that's terrible. I think it's such a disservice. It's like, you'll get better service in a car dealership. You'll go in and it's like...
Yeah, that's so true.
Let me talk you through the artwork. Can I introduce you to an essay? Can I give you some references for this? Or are you just happy having a wee look around, The first thing I do in the gallery, the very first thing I do is I get my bum off that seat and I walk to the door and I meet and greet every single person that comes in. I explain the gallery layout, I explain the shows that are on, and I offer them, I said, "Do you want me to give you a wee tour? Are you quite happy to have a look? Or alternatively, come into the kitchen at the end and let's have a talk about the show." They're my favourite ones. And when there were young people, I often say to the young people, walk around, come back in, but don't leave without telling me your favourite piece in the gallery and your least favourite piece in the gallery.
I love that.
And it's really good, because if nothing else, everybody has a favourite.
Yeah.
And everybody has one that doesn't work for them.
Yeah.
And I am of course, they're the same, it's the same coin, right? They're both sides of the same coin. The validation for artists is people viewing their work and having an opinion on it, whether it's good or bad. They do not care. Most artists just go, they were engaged with that.
That's right.
I think it's really good, rather than just walking through and leaving again, which is terrible for us all.
Yeah, and I love that, posing that question. That's so cool, because that's not too threatening for people either.
No, especially for young ones. So I put a huge emphasis on people bringing their kids into the gallery, and young people coming in, and people that would never normally come in. Because if you can make the experience of an art gallery universally accessible, they will take that feeling anywhere in the world. Yeah, coming back to that point I made about art is dying, visitor numbers across the world in the arts are declining. Very, very few people are coming into dealer galleries now. I don't know what the stats are like for visitor numbers. I'm sure there's a lot of tourists that still go to the institutions, but generally, most people don't care about art. That's a really horrible, hard fact, but most people don't care about art. Only there's a very, very small percentage of us around the world who really, really care about art. My family could not give a shit about art. None of them except my mum have been in the National Gallery of Scotland. And that's a taxpayer-funded institution paid for by their wages, Yeah. And yet none of them have ever been in, because they're not interested in it. And I think that's perfectly, perfectly valid.
Yeah.
But we make it worse. The people in the arts somehow tend to think it's this sort of it's the high arts. It goes back to Victorian times, the high arts, opera and fine art. I mean, what a ludicrous notion, the notion of, well, there are fine arts and then there's craft.
Yes, I know that fine art definition is very strange to me. And do you think, is it actually that people are less interested, or is it that some of our platforms are changing? Like there's work online and there's Instagram and, there's other ways of seeing art, artist-run spaces, that kind of thing?
Oh, I think artist-run spaces are really important. Again, because I think they're grassroots. There's no purpose in artist-run spaces kind of trying to present themselves as anything other than what they are and what they do. So I've got a lot of time for them. There's a lot of artists who work very, very hard in those spaces as well. Accessibility is a massive issue, in art. But I would sort of, how I frame it, and you mentioned something very early on about, what would you say to artists that get rejected by a gallery? Because we get possibly in the gallery 6 to 8 applications a month. We get PDFs sent to us with lots of work in it. And I've got 19 representations, which is bursting at the seams. I cannot take any more on. And yet you think, well, gosh, if we're getting that many applications, there is a lot of artists out there who are not being presented at the moment. And how I like to describe it to artists is, it's a bit like think of it more like a magazine with an editorial policy. Now, you wouldn't send poetry into a nature mag necessarily, but you wouldn't send photos of your kind of the birds in your garden to an art magazine. So think of it as editorial, and what we're looking for is something that fits the premise or the register of the gallery. And what I mean by the register is the visual register of it. That's often informed by the individual's taste, and that's one of the real privileges of being in a gallery where you go, that appeals to me, that doesn't. I wrestle with that because on a personal level, I wrestle with that quite a lot because it's very indulgent to go, oh, well, I'll take this artist on because I like them. And occasionally I have to test myself and say, well, I'm going to take risks on this one. I described the gallery the other day to an artist who says, artists talk a lot about their practice. And the gallery is my practice. And I get things wrong all the time. It's a living embodiment of my relationship to art. And sometimes it works really well and sometimes it doesn't, in the same way that, you're a painter and that some stuff works for you. You go, that just feels fantastic. But 9 out of 10 probably don't. You probably go, well, that never worked. And I think one of the joys of art is one of the few places we have left to make mistakes and nobody to hassle us. Artists for making mistakes. I'm fed up seeing artists coming in with 4 perfect works, whereas what I want to see is a shoebox full of ideas, most of which never worked, because the hunger of trying to resolve something, or the hunger of that inquiry, is more important to me than 3 or 4 really nice finished pieces.
That's so interesting. And so how do you like to see the artists who are coming to approach you?
Yeah, it's the best answer when you're under time pressure. It's a lot to ask a gallerist to come in and have an hour of their time, and I don't mean that in a kind of flippant way. Gallerists are really, really busy people, and all the gallerists in New Zealand are pretty competitive. It's quite a bitchy scene, I don't actually enjoy the art industry much in New Zealand. I find it's very closed. It's very cloak and dagger. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. I don't think it's a particularly honest industry either.
Why is that, do you think?
I just think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of closed conversations. People have agendas, They really do. There are lots of decisions made behind closed doors and secret deals and weird handshakes going on. And it's I can't even be bothered with that side of the industry whatsoever. However, what I would say is they're some of the most hardworking people I've ever met. And most art dealers in this country are not rich. There's this really weird myth that we're all driving around in sort of, sports cars and milk in it. Most of us struggle to meet our mortgage payments, and I can tell you that hand on heart. It doesn't look like that from the outside because we present ourselves as sort of, in the art world where there is heaps of money. There's $30 million worth of art being sold at auctions in the past 13 months in New Zealand. That does not filter down to dealer galleries and commercial galleries. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah.
But they're good. I've got a lot of time, a lot of respect for the gallerists because they are the ones that are putting a lot of their personal stuff on the line in order to do it. I think we've all got a screw loose up there somewhere. I think that's our common factor as gallerists in this country is you've got to be slightly crazy to be able to pull it off month after month. The work that they put into it, and it's a thankless job, The institutions are not buying up a lot of work from dealers. They have their favourites. They're preordained, the galleries that they sort of buy from because they're often working with curators in those institutions. It's very interesting in the art world in that art is not the most important thing in the commercial art world. And that, to the day I die, that will be the biggest insight that I learned about the art world.
Really?
Is the
So
art
what is it?
They're not. It's everything else. It's ego, and it's positioning, and it's ego, and it's especially money. But it is not art. That is a complete fallacy in New Zealand.
That is a very sad state of affairs.
They pretend it is. They pretend it's all about art and the artist. The art and the artist do not sit high up in that triangle. Money, ego, agendas, they all come first. And art is way, way down the list. And what we tried to do at the gallery is sort of invert that. And it's been very, very difficult because you don't get the same level of buy-in. So as I mentioned earlier on, we've never had one institutional sale. So what I mean by an institutional sale is we've never had a sale to a taxpayer-funded art gallery in this country in 5 years. My Australian friends and my British friends in London cannot believe that. And, the institutions say, well, it's all about budgets. We have this committee that you go through and everything. But half the time half the time there are decisions made for reasons that you'd probably be very surprised about.
And I guess they have their favourite dealer galleries, and there's quite a sort of symbiotic
Absolutely. It's a closed
relationship.
shop. It's absolutely closed shop, yeah. But what's interesting, though, the younger generation of artists coming through now see this, and they actually don't want to take part in those institutionalised competitions or awards, or they didn't want to take part in that because they feel it's too myopic and it's too self-centred and too self-congratulatory. And that's why digital, for example, is a really interesting space. It's far more egalitarian. And in fact, the really interesting thing is if you look at the curators that work for the public institutions, very, very few of them have an interest in new forms of experimental art like digital because they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to assess it. They don't know how to show it. They don't know what the conversations are around it, how it's made. You talk to a 19-year-old artist who's in that space, they know their stuff intimately inside out. So they're bypassing all this stuff because they're going, it's all a bit bullshit, isn't it? It's all a bit hierarchy driven and a bit money driven.
A bit old school.
Bugger that. We're doing digital, we're into AR, we're into generative art, we're into AI.
Yeah.
And I think there was a wee bit panic about it in the market. It was very funny. We wanted to take Fountain, so the Scott Lawrie Gallery, which is a business, and I have a separate business that I'm a partner in called Fountain, completely separate. But Fountain has a wall in the gallery, a big screen attached to it. And what Fountain does is a platform for digital art only. So there's no painting and sculpture. It's only digital art. We applied to take that to Auckland Art Fair, Aotearoa Art Fair now, in 2023, and the selection panel rejected it. They rejected it on the basis that, we didn't want to bring NFTs into the fair, and, it feels a bit like sort of posters and still images. And on one level, I agree with them. There's a lot of terrible art in the NFT world. People get very confused about what an NFT is. They think an NFT is an actual artwork. It's not. It's just the mechanism by which you prove the provenance. It's a digital stamp, it's a digital. But this thing around the move to digital is quite interesting. It's far more egalitarian. It's far more grassroots, and very, very exciting. It seems to be that the establishment art stuff, likes to play in sculpture and performance and painting, all the high art stuff. And it's become so myopic, it's collapsing in its own self-importance, whereas you've got this really, really exciting stuff happening with kids making it in their bedrooms. It's just so much more interesting.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's fascinating.
And you do kind of wonder over time if the art world is going to change, the face of the art world will change, and that some of those young people coming through will bring a different dynamic to it.
Completely. The art world will die. The art world's dying already. It's all propped up with people that have self-interest in it. So what happens is they're pretending that it's somehow really, really valuable, and it's moving on. Life outside mainstream art galleries is moving at 100 times the pace of what an art gallery is moving at. They're becoming fossilized relics of culture. They're not even that interesting. They're not looking at the vanguard anymore. They're kind of looking at the rear guard. They're kind of looking at life through the rear view mirror now. I find that really sad. So we dismiss most of those. I say to younger galleries starting up who are obsessed by this, about we need something, blah blah blah. And maybe they could get in for the Walters Prize eventually. And it's like, ignore all that stuff. Ignore it. It'll just lead to heartbreak. Go and explore these new forms of art because they're far more accessible, far more interesting, and none of them have an agenda.
Yeah. So interesting. I mean, Scott, I feel like there's 100 million things we could be talking about. Oh my goodness. I feel like we could go for 3 hours. Can you take us back, Scott, to your art school days and take us through the journey from there?
After art school, I got a job in advertising. Went to study law, got a job in advertising. That took me around the world. Went from Edinburgh to Glasgow, worked in Glasgow for a while, then worked in London for a year, and went back to Glasgow, then Sydney. I was in Sydney for 14 years. During that 14 years, I did 2 years in Wellington. So we launched Kiwi Bank. And rebranded the Royal New Zealand Air Force. I was meant to be here for 6 months and ended up staying for a couple of years. Fell in love with New Zealand, fell in love with Kiwis. But my partner at the time, he was really missing the big city action in Sydney. So we went back there. I went back there for 10 years. And then I came back on my own to New Zealand 7 years ago. And I've been here ever since, yeah.
Wow. And you became very famous in New Zealand with Grand Design.
World famous in New Zealand.
World famous in New Zealand. And you were you built a house at Pakari. And that was on Grand Designs, the first New Zealand season.
Was.
Yeah. So how did that happen?
So what happened was I broke up with my partner in Sydney, and it was a devastating breakup. It was a really difficult one. And I was getting a bit of therapy at the time for a number of reasons, and I was drinking very heavily, and I thought, this is not the way of coping. And I remember the psychologist said to me, he said, what would you like to, if you could reboot your life, what would you actually love to do? It could be anything, singing an opera, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I've always wanted to build a house. And I said, I really want to leave Australia, but I'm not ready to go back to Scotland. And I did enjoy New Zealand. And he said, why don't you build a house in New Zealand? And that's what happened. I sold my business at the time. One of the big agency groups offered me good money for it, which is fantastic. So I took that money and I invested it in New Zealand, and I built the Pakari House, which was a terrific project, a really good thing to focus on for a year. And it did that with a lot of humour. And you have to build houses with a lot of humour.
Yeah, you do. Or it will kill you.
Yeah, exactly. It cost a lot of money. But I loved living there. I was 5 years there, me and wee Skippy, a wee dog. And we had a lovely time. I did get a bit lonely. So after 5 years, I decided to sell. And then I came down to Auckland. Couldn't afford Auckland Central, so I went out to Huia.
Beautiful.
It's a beautiful part of the world. Yeah. Not far from here, actually. If you go on the beach and walk for an hour, you'll eventually reach.
Yeah.
And and that's how I sort of ended up. How I got back into art is quite interesting, because I'd always collected over the years. And when I say collected, it sounds very grand. I mean, I just always supported young artists. I would go to galleries and sort of pick up, smaller works. And the more I got into it, the more it's kind of like when you start getting into wine. You start off at sort of $15 a bottle, and then you eventually get up to $50 a bottle because you go, well, I've sort of done that. You can understand the levels of your taste changes, and art's a bit like that as well. There's a certain level of artist where the price starts to go up because culturally they're a bit more valuable. So I was very interested. I'd always collected art.
And what were you looking for when you were collecting work?
That's a really good question. What I'll look for. I think I have quite a strange aesthetic. I mean, somebody said to me once, they said, "Oh, you like the ugly stuff." And I sort of do like art, which is visually interesting and new, as opposed to seductive in a sense which is designed to suck me in through something being very pretty. Now, I like prettiness in art, but I also question if that's the place in order to do pretty. I think beauty doesn't have to be pretty, for example. And if I want to do something that's really pretty, I then collect fabric or linen or something. So linen cushions, wallpaper, they are designed to be kind of enhance your life through the beauty of them. Artwork, personally, I don't think falls into the same category. I think art needs to ask bigger questions as opposed to allowing us passive beauty. Now, that's quite controversial. And of course, there is a role in the spectrum of art history for things that are just really beautiful. If you were to do a straw poll and say to people, what are your top paintings, a lot of them would be because, they feel something on that emotional level attached to them. I've always been much more interested in sort of capturing something that you can never quite work out because it says something about the time we live in. I think the time we live in is very confusing. I think we're coming into a stage of late capitalism where things are disintegrating, and I want to see that reflected in artworks. The notion of art as an answer for anything is long gone. It's just about asking questions now. And if you ask questions about the time we're living in, you see some interesting results because, if you think about what's happened in the past 5, 6, 10 years even, with Trump, with Brexit, the war, the war in Ukraine most recently, the world is feeling very fractured. The world's feeling like a dangerous place.
And the pandemic as well.
Yeah, the pandemic, absolutely. I mean, COVID chucking that into the middle of this mix. People were feeling very nervous and rudderless, and they didn't have any direction in life. And art was always something that could build around you as a bit of it. It would insulate you sort of thing from all those wild things that are happening in the world. People still collect that way. They want art as insulation. I'm much more interested in grabbing it because I go, well, it's focusing on something in the here and now. That has its own trends. If you look at conceptualism at the moment and cold hard conceptualism, I think is had its day at the moment. I don't think people want that. I'm actually quite controversial in our world and saying I don't think people want to be that intellectually challenged at the moment because I think they've been so beaten up by life that they actually just want a place where they can enjoy something or have a bit of, I can understand that insulation thing around wrapping yourself with something a bit familiar, in a world that feels very... So pottery, for example, the reason pottery and ceramics have gone off the dial in terms of popularity is, I think it's to do with the physicality of it, that the tangibility of it, that you can touch something, you can see the hand of the maker in it. And therefore, to me, that leads to a thought around, is that because people want human connection? They can see the human in the artwork. And I love that, but I talked earlier on about this notion of art being a portal. And, Sally Gabori, who we represent the estate of, is the reason her paintings are so popular is because she was brought up on a tiny little island, 13 kilometres by 10, Bentinck Island in the Gulf of Carpentaria. Her paintings are so bright and beautiful, and people respond to them in a way that's deeply personal, and they connect to her. Now, where else in our life are we going to have an experience of growing up on a sandbar island in the Gulf of Carpentaria? The answer is zero, but we can do that. We can have a glimpse of that. We can have a glimpse of life through her eyes, through her works. So they become, so art as a portal that way
Yeah.
to connection to new experiences is really, really valuable. Now, if you take that same premise and take it into something a bit more political or a bit more kind of, controversial, it works the same way,
Yeah, absolutely. And then going back to when you started your own gallery, which was the Vivian in Matakana. Can you tell us about that? And then sort of how you went from there into Auckland and started your own Scott Lawrie Gallery.
So the Vivian was interesting because the Vivian existed. And I lived on the hill in Pakari. And a few people had said to me, you've got to check out this art gallery called the Vivian. And I was a bit naughty really, because I sort of thought, oh, well, I'll eventually go into it, because the galleries I'd seen up there were kind of quite cute, but they were sort of, it was knitted kiwis and that sort of thing. And I thought, well, it's nice, but I'm not really interested in it. And I remember walking into the Vivian for the first time, and Helen owned it at the time. And I walked in and they had a Fiona Partington on the wall. And I thought, well, bugger me, I'm in this I'm an hour from Auckland, and I'm in this
village.
Yeah, small village, purpose-built, and there's a Fiona Partington on the wall. And, and there were some really interesting artists, so I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. And I mentioned to Helen at one point, I said, Helen, if you ever decide to sell this place, give me a shout, And eventually she did, a few months later, she says, yeah, I'm ready to retire now. And, would you like to take it over? And did. It was difficult taking over a gallery like that though, because there was a lot of artists involved in its running. And when you come in with a vision for how you want it to be, because otherwise it becomes too self-serving. Artists just put in their mates and it becomes this really nice group of friends. But it stops serving culture at a particular level when you just invite your friends and it becomes that myopic thing again. And I wanted to change the register of the Vivian. It did it an awful lot brilliantly well. And it was hugely, I think the talent and the quality of the art that it showed was outstanding. Had a very, very strong community connection, which I tried to really foster and keep. And I think we did that very well. We definitely kept that community aspect open. There was a lovely earthiness to the Vivian, which I tried to keep as well in the Scott Lawrie Gallery, which is I think it's that idea that white box art galleries can be quite cold places. So we've always tried to, with the Vivian and with Scott Lawrie Gallery, we tried to make them that wee bit more comfortable for people walking in. And I loved that about the Vivian. One of the issues with it though was when you looked at the program on it, you just thought they were doing the same thing again and again and again. And I really wanted to change that. As soon as you go in and you want to change something in a community like that, people get upset.
Yeah. You come up with resistance.
Completely. Well, because their self-interests aren't being... People look after their own self-interests in the arts.
And it must be so hard to come to a gallery and, you've got this group of artists that are connected to that gallery. Did you have to let some of the artists go? Or?
I did, yeah. And that was hugely controversial. And I never let them go because they weren't good artists. I just didn't think that the conversation that they were having through the work was not a conversation I was particularly interested in exploring. So it was never to do with the quality of the artist. It's to do with the positioning of the gallery. What do you want it to achieve? It's not enough to sort of just set something up and see how it goes. I don't operate like that. I know other people do. They just sort of say, well, I'm an empty vessel, chuck into it and let other people make sense of it. But for me, I just thought, well, we've not got the time to do that. We need to go in there and try and make some points. So I think we did. I mean, it's very interesting. Somebody said to me the other day, and they said, a lot of people hated what you did at the Vivian. And I was a wee bit shocked at that, but I actually got in the car and I thought, that's quite good. That's quite good that people hated it.
They're engaging.
It means that's all right.
And
Love
what did they hate
are,
about it, do you think?
Yeah. They didn't like the change, I think they felt this terrific sense of ownership around it. But what cracks you up the most about it is it's all the people that, the biggest complainers were the ones that had never, ever bought an artwork from the gallery. And so when we closed it with COVID, because we could not afford to open, the running costs on that thing were monstrous. It was huge. And so we closed it during COVID because it was not self-sustaining. We were going backwards really quickly. And I pointed out at the time, I said, well, you should have bought more stuff. And no point complaining about it all the time and then never doing. And of course, our artists are inherently selfish people because they put their art as inherently of the self. I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I mean that, it's about them. They put their life into the work.
Absolutely.
Then they have a show and they put their life on display. There is nowhere for an artist to hide. You can't go, I did better ones last year. The thing you're looking at is the output.
And that's the reflection of the person.
So they do get very, and I appreciate that. I think that's fair enough that they put their life and soul into it. So when they come across something that sort of says, we're not really interested in that, we're going to be interested in this, they get terrifically upset about it. It's very interesting.
Yeah. And were you actually thinking, I mean, did you have ideas of becoming a gallerist? You obviously had a good collection of your own. So were you kind of thinking at some point that's something you might like to do, or did the Vivian just kind of come about and you thought, okay, I'm down a different road?
No, I guess what was starting to happen was I'd always, for 25 years, I lived around different countries in the world, and we go back to Europe a lot. So you would see, so I saw a lot of art, and I saw a lot of art on an international level, and I guess one of the interesting things about setting up a gallery was I didn't. Let me come back one step. As a collector, it was very easy for me to go in and run a gallery because I was showing the gallery the artists that I was collecting that had no representation, and I found that really easy because I built up those connections as a collector over the years, and I really believed in their work. So there was a logical extension to that, which was, let's show these people to the world and tell their story.
And I did read somewhere that you ran out of room in your own house, so you needed a gallery space to
put it in. Yeah, storage units are the bane of my life because and now the collection is not growing at the at an investment level, for want of a better word. It's not growing. The storage cupboards are more expensive than what the collection is growing at, but that's all right. I don't collect art for investment purposes. I never have. I've collected it because I fall in love with it, or it's making a really interesting point.
So interesting. So where to from here, Scott? So you started. How did you start up the Scott Lawrie Gallery?
So the Vivian closed at COVID, and that was really sad. And I was very traumatized. Actually, I had a bit of a breakdown. I was drinking very heavily on that. I had massive debt. I mean, every single artist got paid out. Nobody got. There were no bills unpaid for the Vivian. That's I think it's very important to sort of emphasize that, because when you close a gallery, there's a shed load of rumours that start to fly around, and nobody everybody was paid for what they want to do. So it was a very clean slate. And I actually got a call. I was ready to give up, and I got a call from a client, Mark Bauer, and Mark and Deb had said, "Look, we've got a wee floor under our building, and do you want to share that with a photographer called Stephen Tilley? And you've got a wee room, and you can share it, and you can split the rent, and would that help you get back on your feet?" And I was like, well, let me have a wee think about it. My friends all said, "Of course, you must take it. It'll get you back on your feet." So I started offering grail in, and I was there for a year and a half. And by that stage, I decided to sell the house and buy a warehouse in Mount Eden at the Steelworks and convert that to an art gallery. I just thought, well, if I'm going to do it, it's that whole thing about do it once, do it well. So I converted Paul Clark, the architect who designed the Packery house, actually designed the gallery.
Oh, wow.
And I live upstairs, it's Jules' own, so I live upstairs, which is fantastic.
Oh, that's
I love
brilliant.
it.
Yeah, perfect.
A lot of work.
It's amazing. And to have your own gallery with your name.
Yeah, I mean, I was the reason I changed from the Vivian, of course, was to give that. I should have. One of the lessons I learned from buying the Vivian was I should have instantly changed the name. I should have actually just closed the business that day and reopened it under another name. There was some good stuff that came from the legacy of the Vivian, but there was an awful lot of terrible stuff that came from the legacy of the Vivian, and you just could not escape that. So one of the lessons I would say to anyone taking over a gallery is changing the bloody name of the thing, because all legacy comes with it, and
that makes sense.
So that felt very free to be able to go to Scott Lawrie Gallery and actually go, right, oh, this is a clean slate with a completely separate.
And did you start with your own collection in there?
No, I but with artists that I had collected, absolutely, yeah. But you're always picking up new artists, and there are some galleries that work very closely with curators, as if curators are somehow the litmus papers of what's happening in the world. Most of them are extremely sheltered academics, on taxpayer money, so they've not really got, and they don't go to galleries. They don't, you'd be really shocked if you knew how many curators in this country actually end up going to look at art galleries. And I have never had a curator come into my gallery. And now you could argue that, oh, well, Scotty only shows shitty art, so therefore they're going to come in. But I've had one non-official curatorial visit, and I had one of the directors very recently, but until then nothing.
Can we start talking about, are you ready to start talking about what the Dealer Gallery is and how it serves artists? Are we ready for this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, just for our listeners, how would you define a dealer gallery?
I hate the word dealer gallery because we're not dealing in anything at all. There are no deals taking place. The only arrangement is, you go into sort of business with your artists and you take a 50-50 cut on everything after GST. So that's the basis for your business relationship on a commercial level. The rest of that, then you select artists, and then you give those artists shows and you market them in a particular way. But there are no crazy deals going on. It's literally you're presenting the work to an audience, and the audience will decide whether it's right for them or not, or whether they will acquire that work. So there's no dealer galleries has always thrown me. I just
it's
think
always thrown me too, actually.
Yeah.
So a commercial gallery in town, how is that different to a dealer gallery?
Well, they're not. They're the same. They're both shops. They're both retail. I don't believe anyone that says anything differently. There's probably extra depth to. I'm a commercial gallery. All dealer galleries are commercial galleries by default. There are certain things you do that quality galleries do above and beyond chuck stuff on the wall and be a retail shop, and that is, you are commissioning essays. You are presenting the work in a particular way. You're planning shows a year in advance. You're giving them group show opportunities. You're deciding who you're going to take to art fair and when. You do talks. You do podcasts. You do films. So all of those things need consideration. From my perspective, I take the cues that I learned in branding and apply them to artists. It's very interesting. There's a very senior artist who said to me recently, and very publicly, and said, yeah, but what you do is you just do all this marking. It's really just about the marking, not about the art. And I think that's wrong. I think it fundamentally is about the art. But what galleries haven't been particularly good at is putting the layer of marketing on it. Now, when you market a brand, the first thing you do is you go, well, what's the vision for the brand? Where does it want to end up and be? And what are the values of this thing? What's its personality? And then what's its story? What's its positioning in the world? Who is it talking to and why? And I try and do that with my artists. I try and go, well, this artist over here they're doing particular work. It's going to speak to a particular demographic over here. This artist over here is doing something very different. It's a different audience. Therefore, my marketing strategy for each of them will be different because they're saying different things. There are some, and that can come down to something as basic as demographic split. So, I have statistics because we measure so much digitally around, what is the gender split of people who buy stuff from the gallery. It's about 64% women who buy stuff. And I can tell their age as well. The sweet spot is 45 to 65, which is a real bugbear for me because my visitation on Instagram and stuff and through those digital social channels is much, much younger.
Yeah.
But the actual money being handed over, the bit that actually keeps you open, is a much, much older demographic, which I find quite interesting.
Yeah.
And we'd probably have more sales to women if it wasn't for the husband killers. Don't get me started on the husband killers. Now, the husband killer is an interesting phenomenon where a woman comes in, she'll fall in love with something, that subjective response. I love this. It speaks to me. I love it. I love it. I love it. I just need to get my husband over the line. And then the husband comes in and he never usually looks that impressed. And he's like, oh, you're kidding me. And when it starts off like that, you think, I'm never going to get this over. And they do it a lot. I call them the husband killers because they just kill the joy in the room, And I say, oh, well, and if you really want it, you can. And she said to me, no, I really want you to love it as well. I was like, well, I don't love it. And then game over. That's the sale gone.
Isn't that sad?
Yeah, quite interesting. Yeah.
That's so sad.
Occasionally, though, the bloke will come in and go, I love it. It's fantastic. It's really good. But yeah,
that's so
women
interesting.
definitely much more open to a broader range of experiences in art.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. I do have a lot of questions here, but
chuck them out, chuck them through. I'll be quick in my answers, I promise.
So just back to the thinking about the different galleries. So you obviously do all these amazing things for your artists. Does that mean that the artist isn't able to show anywhere else?
Well, that's a terrific question, and it's a very loaded question at the moment. The convention is that you would take an artist on and represent them, which means they are yours, either for a particular geographic area, usually North Island, at the very least Auckland. The next layer down would be North Island. The next down would be the whole of New Zealand. So if you're represented by a gallery, you're going to be in one of those three spaces. And that means if you want to buy something from that artist, you generally go through that gallery. Now, that's very good. It's a very good system for making things slightly easier for people. I don't know, and this is where it becomes quite controversial, if it's actually the best thing for the artist. I'm very, very curious to see models where we blow up the existing dealer model and say, what happens if you flipped it? So the artist is at the center of everything, and the artist gets to decide where they get to show, who they get to show with, and when and why. That becomes really interesting. But you mention that to other art gallerists in this country and they just about die. They say it would never work. But I go, oh, maybe it needs to. Maybe we need an Uber moment in the art world, where we need to actually put the power back to the artist to decide where and when and whom they will show with.
And how do you think that's happened, that they've got such a monopoly over an artist?
I think it's so hard to get into a gallery. If I said to you earlier on about we get so many applications from young artists desperate for somewhere to show their work. That's the tragedy of it is, for all the talk they talk about in the art galleries, they offer very little wall space to young artists coming through. That's a real tragedy. There's not enough wall space for young artists.
And just with the way the gallery works with, you might have a solo show if you're lucky, and then you might not be seen in that gallery for months. Or you might be part of a group show and then you sort of come and go with a couple of works. I mean, does it mean being part of a dealer gallery that you have a lot less exposure?
I think that's a very honest question, and I think it's a very fair one, and I think you're right. I think for all the benefits of representation, it's massively flawed, because my artists at the moment have 19, and in order to give them a solo headline show, they're getting one every 18 months. That is not a great way of having an artistic career, because it feels very unfair for me to start marketing an artist through somebody else's show. that's the trap that you fall into. You sort of say, well, we'll promote you really heavily during your show, but for the rest of the year, what do? We put you in the odd group show, we take you to art fair, but we can't suddenly start making artist films halfway through somebody else's show. It would be really rude to do that. It's a very interesting problem.
It's really interesting.
Really interesting.
And do you, I mean, is it sort of a thing that you are always promoting your artists who are with you, and you're like, if a collector comes in, they have a look at what's in the gallery at that time, but then you still take them to your other artists? I mean, is that something that's ongoing?
Yeah, you do. I mean, you top that the website. Our website statistics for visitation are very, very high. For conversion to sales are very, very low. And it's always really surprised me because we invest a lot into our website. And yet there's very few sales that come from that. There's very, very few sales that come through our stockroom. That baffles other gallerists who say to me, I sell most of my work through my stockroom. I never get asked. Nobody ever asks to see anything in the stockroom, even if they've been offered. They tend to come into the gallery. They like to see it on a wall, or they have a very specific artist that they want, but I've never kind of sussed that out. Maybe
I wonder why that is.
Or maybe I've just got a terrible eye. I don't know. Maybe I've just got the worst eye in the business.
I don't think so. Yeah, I mean that's interesting. I guess you're bringing people to your gallery because of what you've advertised, and so maybe they're just kind of in that tunnel of wanting to see what they're expecting and aren't ready for other things.
People do come on and people have their favourite artists and they will support that artist and they will come into the gallery to see the show and they will probably buy a work. And then you might never see them again until that artist shows again. It's quite fascinating.
And so as a gallerist, are you always looking for artists who people know so that you have their following?
No. Most of my artists are unknown. Some of my artists I've found on Instagram.
And that must make it hard for you financially, must make it harder.
Oh, it's ridiculous. I mean, the gallery runs a 1.4% profit margin. The gallery has never afforded me a wage in 5 years, which is why I get really pissed off at people when they have all these opinions about the gallery and what I should be doing and blah, 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 and you did this and you did that. And you go, well, I would understand it if I was taking out 250 grand a year. Taking out of the gallery, but every single dollar that gallery has earned goes back into the gallery. None of it has ever been extracted for me personally, ever. In fact, that's why I still do branding consultancy on the sides and on a Monday in particular.
Really?
And because that gives the income in order for me to pay the mortgage. The gallery has never served as my mortgage in 4 years.
Well, and people would never realise that.
It's if you think about how it works. I mean, there's the side to running a gallery that nobody talks about is this: if I sell a work of yours for $1,000, 15% GST comes off immediately, whether you are registered for GST or not. So we have to do. The government says if you invoice a client, that 15% has to come off. So we're now down to $850, and then we split it 50-50. You're now getting $425. If you look at the linen that you've used on your canvas, if you look at the stretcher, if you look at the lovely tray frame that you put around it, and your time, your expertise, and your creative vision, you're probably breaking even on that sale. From a gallery perspective, if you look at my rent, my rates, my insurance, the advertising that we do, the social media that we do, the films, commissioning the essays, getting the technician in, just paying my rates on a daily basis, I'm not making any money either. So that's how dire it is at that level with young artists, and why most gallerists need one or two senior artists. It's a very different proposition selling a Sally Gabori for $60,000 than it is selling an emerging artist for $3,000. Yeah. And it gets even trickier if you take them to art fair. So the art fair booth might end up being around $25,000 for 4 days of public showing. Now you have to think very carefully about, for that $25,000 outlay, I'm going to have to sell $60,000 worth of work to break even. $60,000 over 4 days. How do you achieve that? Well, if I put in my young artists and they're selling work for $1,500, forget it. So you need to mix in some of those younger artists to say, I'm going to take you to art fair, because it's really good for their careers and really good for their, it gives them a real boost. But economically, it doesn't make any sense. What you have to take is a couple of the senior artists. And that's why this year, you'll see the first 2 days we're taking Roy Good. Roy's now in his late 70s, lives around here, actually. Lovely man, kind of abstract modernism, a very minimalist in form. But he's a senior artist, and his works will be selling for about $25,000 to $30,000 a painting. The last 3 days of the show are going to be the group show for the younger artists, because economically that's all they can do. Otherwise, they've made a massive loss to begin with. And the danger is, of course, then you close the gallery, and then they've got fewer places to show.
It's such a tricky model, isn't it?
It's really hard. And there's no subsidy. There's no subsidies for the artists, and there's no subsidies for galleries. Which is why, it's very interesting in Australia, for example, where a huge part, most commercial galleries in Australia, the number one client is the taxpayer. And that's because the state galleries have a remit to go out and spend in galleries for new acquisitions. That's their job. That does not happen in New Zealand with the taxpayer-funded institutions, with taxpayer-funded curators. What have they got to risk? I have this really weird thing, and the curators are lovely. I'm sounding like they're the kind of the most evil people in the country. They're not. Most of them are really lovely people, absolutely passionate about what they do. But I don't think any of them have felt any level of risk before. And I have a huge amount of respect for people that are running independent galleries in this country, because they are putting their mortgage on the line every single month. They're actually doing it. I have so much more respect for them. I think they're in and yet all the kudos, all the thing goes to the institutions and the institutional shows. And it's actually all bullshit.
Yeah.
It's all
kind
safe.
of round the wrong way, isn't it?
Totally. It's all safe. It's all sanitized. And, but galleries they're a real cutting edge of it. They're really putting risks to get that work on the wall. Well, artists are under no contract. I mean, none of my artists are on a contract at all. We have a one-page agreement, so there's a framework to operate within that says you'll get paid this, and then this will happen, and then that'll happen. But most, we're not working on a contractual basis. They can go anywhere they want and show it anywhere in their time. Most artists I work with don't want the hassle of the gallery end of it. They want to be in the studio painting. And I talk about it a lot as a business partnership with them, that we handle that side. We handle the invoicing, we'll handle the presentation, we'll handle the marketing for you.
Which is huge.
Yeah, but I don't have a business without the artists, but the artists have a business without me, for sure. Yeah. A lot of the younger ones coming through are... they are bucking that trend. A lot of them don't want to go with galleries. I think that's hard, though. I think galleries give you a focal point. If nothing else, they give you a focal point once a year for your show, and they pre-filter it, so people will generally listen if you've got a show on at the gallery. They'll generally pop in if
and
you're
you've
doing
got
a pop-up
that following.
somewhere. Yeah. It's weird. It's a very strange ecosystem, and somehow artists have more power if they're not power, but more kudos, I guess, if they're represented. Yeah. And it's always sat a bit uncomfortable with me.
That's what I was going to ask, actually. Is it the holy grail for artists?
I think it's a useful tool. I don't know if it's the holy grail, and I think that's changing. You still got a lot of artists who, especially young artists, who their ambitions are not real. They tell you about their shoot, what their dreams are, and they are. What a lot of them have to realize is it's probably, literally sort of, 1 in a million artists makes it to a significant international level, and I like to remind young artists of that right away. To go, just do the thing, don't worry about it, just keep making. It's really important, because you take it back to the idea that if they didn't do it, they would. A lot of artists I know, and I don't know if you consider yourself in this bracket, it's like you have to do it. It's actually become such an ingrained part of your existence, your expression to the world, that without it you would shrivel up.
And there are so many artists who are selling work, really quite well through Instagram and sort of artist-run spaces, group shows and artist-run spaces, or in community galleries, or, all those other areas. But a lot of artists still feel like their work isn't being completely validated or valued unless they're at a proper gallery.
Yeah, I think that's a loaded question. I think there's a lot of insecurities with artists. Why? The work that can be hung anywhere, right? I can put the work in my kitchen. I can put it in the gallery. I can put it in here. I can put it in an institution. Now, the context of where you're showing it changes the perception of that work and how it's perceived and how it's valued. I'm really interested in that. I'm really interested in the transmogrification that happens when you take a painting that you've done in your studio and you lean it against the wall and then you put it up in the gallery. Why is it suddenly culturally more important? I'm really interested in that. It's a huge area that I often say ours, if you look at somebody like Hugo Koha Lindsay, and I think his work is fantastic, but he'll often skateboard using the detritus and the dust on his studio floor and just skateboard through that onto a canvas. And it's stuff that we would walk past in the street. It's stuff that we would walk past in a skip. We wouldn't give it two thoughts, And yet when we put them in stretchers and put them in an art gallery, what do they do? And that's been around for a long time. I mean, that's like, you go back to the beginnings of conceptual art with Marcel Duchamp in 1917, showing a fountain, the urinal where it turned upside down, and sort of taking the uselessness of something, removing its function and putting it in an art gallery so we are forced to look at it through form only as a found object. And that's still really interesting for me in 2022. How do we, why does art have that power? Where does that power come from? How is that power constructed? And if you actually really look through history and how it's done, it's a product of late capitalism.
And it's just, all the artists, the amazing artists I've spoken to in my small world of the Creative Matters podcast, to me, they're all as valuable, and the work that they make is it's all incredible work that is coming from inside them, and this amazing creativity and all the ideas behind it, and the passion that the person has for the making. Why is art sort of ranked and sort of quite hierarchical?
You see, I'm split on this because I do think, there's a side to me as a sort of socialist who came from Marxist background. So ideas of equality and equity are really, really important to me. But I do think you have to put a filter over, is that better than this? And that sounds really hypocritical of me. But the reason I say that is, if I have to become the editor of what you experience in my gallery, and the best way I kind of think to explain it is in terms of an equitable basis. Is I walk into a group of people and I give them all a guitar, give them all one for free, and go, "There's your guitar, go away and play it. We'll give you some lessons." Out of those 10 people, one of them might end up playing the guitar really well, and the other 8 might be really shit, and one might be terrible, completely tone deaf. Now, the equitable part is you've given them access to a guitar, but it does not mean they're all going to be good guitarists. And art is exactly the same. Anybody can paint, anybody can draw, and literally, you've got the ability to do it, go for it. But it doesn't mean it's going to be necessarily interesting. And we've got to get over this thing. I wrestle all the time with, is what I do interesting? Because the only person that's telling me it's interesting is me. I'm not having that external reinforcement. You could argue that the Scott Lawrie Gallery, which I think is kind of really exciting in terms of how we approach things, but you could argue that it's the least successful gallery in New Zealand on a commercial level, because we've not had the peer recognition that others yearn for. But the good news is I've set it up to not look for it. And I think if you start to desperately want to be accepted, and you start to really want to play that game, you lose something. You really lose something in the spirit of it, you know.
And you start comparing yourself and watching what other people are doing.
I promise you, I could turn that gallery overnight into a place that brings me in $1 million revenue a year, and I could take fantastic salary from it. The issue would be my heart would not be in the work that I was selling. I'd rather go and sell really nice. I love fabric. I was just back from Paris recently, and I went to some of the fabric shops, and oh my gosh, I just rather sell fabric. Fabric's beautiful stuff, peacock feather, velvet.
Oh my God, I love velvet. So if you were to change your gallery to become more like that, what would you do? What would you have to do?
You would sell stuff that people would buy that was really accessible, that they didn't have to necessarily think about. So you sell a lot prettier stuff, a lot more accessible, probably a lot more expensive. There's also no correlation between the price of something and the cultural value of it. I don't think, one of the things I giggle about a lot in the art world is the price of artworks being sold, especially in the auction market and everything. I cackle with laughter at that. There is no artwork in the world worth $1 million. Not one. And to my dying day, you will never convince me otherwise. Oil and linen does not hold that. It doesn't hold that much value. It's never stopped a bullet. Guernica never stopped a bullet being fired. It never saved a single life.
Yeah.
I do not believe it. I'll never be convinced that art can.
And it's purely just the connection with the artist and their name.
Oh, totally. It's all manufactured. It's part of the same thing. Don't be swayed by the value of something and the price of something, because those things do not equate. Just because something's sold for $145 million. I'm very controversial because I think Basquiat's one of the most overrated artists in the world. I kind of really like the work. It's quite illustration. It's quite cool. His life story is really funky, But in terms of art, in terms of value to art, no, I'm sorry. I'm never buying into it. I giggle every time one of his work sells for over $1 million.
It's incredible,
it's
isn't it?
It's an in-joke,
Yeah. It's such an interesting, there's so many different interesting facets to this conversation, So what would your advice be to somebody who has approached a gallery and they haven't been accepted? Is that a sign that their work is shit? No.
The question they've got to ask themselves is, why are you approaching a gallery in the first place? What's the function of that? What do you want the gallery to do? Do you want them to what is it for your ego that needs massage, that you need to be with a gallery? And on a functional level, what role do you want them to play in your career? Is it just to make life easier for you because they're going to sell? They've got an audience. They've got or you know what? That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is the idea of self-guided, own business gallerists, own business artists, as in they operate their practice as a business. I think that's really exciting. Social media is your friend. Social media is free. Build up an Instagram account, build up a Facebook account. You will soon know by the number of your followers if you're doing something well. There's your litmus test. I get really excited about these channels. I think they're really good. You can also promote it. You can have a business account and, for $25 get that post in front of 5,000 people. There is no return on investment greater than social media in this country, if not around the world. So you'll pay $1,500 for a full, whatever it is, for a full page ad in one of the art magazines here. How do you know what the return on investment is on that? Every artist I know wants to be in those magazines. I want a print ad. And I was like, and the people who run the magazines are amazing. They do a terrific job. Again, big passion project for them. But what does that mean? It's like nobody's buying as a result of your ad. It just gives you a really nice, ego thing.
Yeah.
Print versus digital. There's no conversation around the return on investment. The return on investment for Instagram, we'll sell 1.2 works a month on average, 1.2 through Instagram. Our ROI on print ads is 0.
Really?
And it's been 0 for coming up 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. That's a good thing for our listeners to know, I think. And so coming back to the rejected artist, do they think, okay, that gallery is not the right fit for me, I need to try another gallery? Or do they need to sort of rethink what they're doing?
Good stuff generally gets discovered. it's really weird. It's like good stuff floats to the top. I'm quite interested at the moment in working with older artists. Sadly, they're mostly men, in New Zealand at the moment, who might be in their 70s or 80s, because it tended to be quite a blokey thing then,
Yeah, definitely.
And you uncover these people and you go to their studios and you sort of say, this stuff is brilliant. This is really important to the cultural conversation of this country. Let's get it out of your studio and let's get on a gallery wall. I love that. I think there's some Ken Robinson, who passed away recently, his son Cyprian has been digging out some of his work, and I've just been blown out of the water by this stuff. It's been in storage for 30 years,
really?
And it's really good. So there is a role of uncovering that stuff, but coming back to the artist, I think they need to ask themselves why, and then go, well, what's the function of being with a gallery? And even if you're with a gallery, there's a lot of unhappy artists. Don't think your life's going to change because you're with a gallery, and you're certainly going to be poorer for a lot longer, because half your money is going to go to them just to pay their insurance and rates, and
that's the thing. I think it is something that people feel they should be aiming for. A lot of artists.
I think the whole ecosystem needs flipped on its head, and this is why. This is why digital opens up so many interesting areas for me. And digital gets bashed around a lot, and there's a good reason for that. As soon as you get Zuckerberg changing the name of his company to Meta as a sort of, as a cover for trying to own the notion of the metaverse, where we have a digital life that is quite separate to our real life. There's a lot of bullshit being talked in that space, but there's actually a lot of excitement around it as well, because you are not constricted by space.
Yeah.
So why don't you build your own digital gallery that when we put on a VR headset, we can come and explore your work in a gallery that would cost you $1 billion to build? But you've designed it yourself in the metaverse, which you can only access in a digital format. But we will be looking at your digital art in a digital environment the way it's meant to be seen.
Yeah.
That opens up really interesting possibilities. So tech is a terrific place, even for artists that are a wee bit more mature. I'm saying to them, Roy Good is a terrific example. He's been introduced to Instagram now, and he loves it because he's connecting with artists around the world. He's seeing art. He's seeing a lot of art from the comfort of his armchair, and he's showing and displaying his work and telling loads of stories about it. It's brilliant to see an 80-year-old on Instagram.
Which is great. It's so good.
It's really good. Digital's your friend as an artist, and it's more important than a bloody stuffy old gallery to show your work.
Yeah, it is changing, isn't it? And do you think sort of across the world there are changes happening within galleries and the way work is shown?
No, I think they're still showing the things that they did in Dickensian times.
So we're not behind in New Zealand?
I don't think we're behind. I think we're very resistant to change. If you look at digital art and we're moving into that as a I'm interested in that on a personal level. And the reason I'm interested in it is because I don't have any of the answers. It's a sheer exploration. I'm just really curious. And curiosity in the art world is something that we should all be inherent to every practice, whether you're a gallerist or an artist. But it's I guess the constant search for something visually new as well. There's not a lot left to see in painting that's visually new. There's just not, we work with some amazing artists who still surprise me on a daily basis. But digital opens up, it broadens that experience for the viewer. So it comes out of an object with a form, and it starts to become an experience with a different visual form. There's 3,000 people at the moment working full time on Apple's new virtual reality headset, on virtual OS. That they reckon that's going to it'll either be the biggest damp squib that Apple have ever produced, or one of the most exciting innovations in our time. That virtual reality, art in virtual reality is going to be very, very interesting to see where those forces meet.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in that. I find it far more egalitarian as well. I mean, if you look at for Fountain specifically, one of the best things for me about Fountain is when you're in an art gallery and you have a painting on the wall for $10,000, there's only one painting. When you work in digital art, it's infinitely replicable. So there's not one object. There's no original. So if you put on a digital art from me and I put it on a USB stick, I then have a copy of the original. And when I pop it onto my computer or on a TV, then the TV's got a copy as well. What I'm really interested in is this notion that, yes, NFTs allow us to mint something as an original, an edition of one. So it functions the same way as a painting. There is this artwork, I'm editioning it as one, going to cost you $10,000. Where I get really interested in it is then saying, right, well, I'm going to do an edition of 5 of that painting for $5,000. And I'm going to do an edition of 100 for $500 each. Now, if you're an artist like Harim Lee or Patricia Piccinini, you cannot buy a digital artwork for that $70,000, $100,000. How are you going to get one? Whereas if I edition it specifically with the artist to say there's an edition of 100 at $500 each, you can own a verified copy with an NFT provenance certificate attached to it that nobody else can own. It's got your name on it for $500. The egalitarian possibilities of digital are outstandingly positive, I think. Really exciting.
Yeah. And then how do you actually enjoy that artwork that you've bought?
It's a terrific question, and it depends what generation you are. We tend to find people that are over 40, 45 seems to be the median age, cannot grasp the notion of looking at something digitally because they feel that the value of that experience is not the same as having a tangible object. So human beings are quite funny. We covet things that are rare. We put terrific value on them because of the rarity, and therefore a price that reflects that. And what digital does is it undermines that massively, and it says, well, you can. And what you find is if you test that proposition of digital art with people over 40, they don't get it at all. Like, why would I want that to put on my TV? If you test that to under 30-year-olds, it's where they are anyway. That's where they're living and working and playing. They are there anyway. That's what the notion of that they do not. The notion of them having a painting is far more problematic than having a digital artwork. Where do I put my painting? I'm in a rented house. I probably will never be able to afford a house for 15 years. Why would I buy a large painting? I'm not going to be restricted. Whereas I could buy a 6-minute digital sequence of something and I'll play it through my TV because I'm streaming through it, or through my iPad or through my phone. So they're carrying their collections with them. And I find, I've not got a lot of data on this, but I find for the young collectors, Fountain's only sold a handful of NFTs. It's not like we sold hundreds of them. But the people who have bought them, they're either streaming through TVs in their home, through things like the Samsung screen, or they carry them around like little personal collections and they show them to people on their phones. That I struggle with that, I have to say.
Yeah,
it's like I sometimes go, I don't know if I want my phone.
It's interesting though, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then, I mean, how can that kind of artwork become an investment, or how can it be passed down from generation to generation?
Well, you own the beauty of the NFT is, it's minted on the blockchain, and the blockchain is indelible. There is no way for that blockchain to be deleted. There's a lot of misinformation. There's actually a lot of crap around how people view NFTs, to their detriment, actually, because the rest of the world is flying away, and then people in New Zealand are so gloomy about them that the world is just bypassing New Zealand now. The most of the world's major art fairs have dedicated spaces for NFTs because they realize what they are, whereas people here think they're apes on motorbikes. So these things are happening in the world already, and there's a certain mindset that comes through that goes, that is the asset, that is the object. It just happens to be digital. It happens to be created with ones and zeros. I mean, how the hell? I mean, if you're really honest, how the hell did we land in a place where pigment and a binding agent on canvas becomes the valuable thing in our world? It's the same thing as ones and zeros. I mean, God, it's not more valuable inherently. It's just because of a tradition.
Yeah, it's just a different medium.
Totally, and the controls around it. You look at the artwork and you go, that painting, that pigment and binding agent on linen, sold for $150 million. Therefore, it must be valuable. Most art historians will tell you that the price of the artwork, the price paid for the artwork, has no relation in any way with the cultural value of it. Well, the best way to explain it is this: if so Hareem Lee, who I represent, the terrific artist, she will work for 18 months on an animation sequence to produce one work of art. 18 months. That might cost her 150 grand of her time. And she needs to work with developers. She needs to work with specialist programmers on specialist machines that cost a shed load of money to operate. So she's done this thing. She's invested in it as an artist. She's directed the sequence. She's got involved in the programming of the sequence. Now, if you, at the moment, so she makes this artwork. She pops it on a USB stick. She gives it to me. Again, infinitely replicable. How do you ascribe value to that? To something that's infinitely replicable, that can be copied 1,000,000 times and remains the same thing. Now, until the blockchain, until the advent of non-fungible tokens, we didn't have a way of saying, I'm going to addition this as 5 here, Reem. So this new work, I'm going to embed into the blockchain 5 additions. And then if anybody buys it or resells it, we're going to attach their name to it, their ID to it. So publicly, anybody can see the provenance of that artwork at any time. They know there's 5 editions of it. So you ascribe value at that point to digital art. That's what makes digital so exciting. That's why the time has come for digital to be seen as the same as oil on canvas or a bronze sculpture or something.
And then with resale, with through that platform, does the artist get paid again?
They do. There's a caveat to that. I mean, a lot of people say, so what you can do in the blockchain is you can put a little condition on the token that says anytime this is transferred, a percentage will go to the artist. Now, in found it's 7.5%, but we're noticing on a lot of platforms they're shifting that up to 10%. So 10% of every resale will go to the artist. The reason we did it 7.5% is because obviously you've got 100 grand of development money that needs to be paid back somehow. So the 7.5% we embedded in there for the artist. There is the caveat to that is if you can only buy and sell on the same blockchain. So if somebody wants to go to a different blockchain, a different cryptocurrency, then you won't necessarily get that 10% resale you were talking about. Yeah. But that's the benefit of it, which I love, is the longevity of, if you buy it and sell it. Look, technically you could shift it to another blockchain. It's probably a really dumb thing to do. You keep it on the same blockchain generally, so it's traceable.
Oh, that's good. I mean, that's a good little introduction to NFTs.
Yeah, that's a really interesting space.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So back to running your gallery, what do you love most?
What do I love most about running a gallery?
And owning a gallery.
The owning a gallery bit's really simple. It's just you're in art. And you're baked into it and you're up to your ears in it every day. I always say there's no part-time switch on, switch off proposition for art. You're either in art or you're not, You're either doing it or you're not. There's no sort of dip in at the weekends. And I love that. I love the immersiveness of that as a world. Because it's the best part is art is really about people. It's not about money. It's about connection. And I love that. You get so many different perspectives. It's a terrific way of getting lots of perspectives about life and life outside your own experiences. I think it would be the people thing around art. It's a very good way of coming outside of your own perspective of life and seeing somebody else's life. And that's becoming more and more important because, it gives us a chance to argue about things as human beings. When you look at a body of artwork or you look at a single piece, and you can argue like buggery about it and still leave the room as friends. And we have very few places left as human beings to do that. We are allowed by default to own our relationship with the piece that we're looking with or not. And nobody really minds. So if you and I were to go to the same gallery and rave about the stuff we liked, I might not be able to stand what you liked, but I'll always respect your decision and we'll leave and we'll go for lunch and we'll still keep talking about it. And I love that fact. I think that's really important to cherish, that you don't have to like everything.
Yeah. And I think being a part of a group who value creativity and who are being creative and who are artists is a really special, amazing place to be. You know, I find just with the people I speak with on the podcast, you know, they're all incredible people who have got so much to offer the world and who, like I say in my intro, who actually enrich my life. And if I have a little break with the podcast, I miss it.
Yeah.
Because I just love meeting all these beautiful people who have got so many interesting things to talk about. And they notice so many interesting things in the world.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it's also our duty to support the arts, you know. I think it's all our duty to support the arts. More so if you've got money. If you're wealthy, it's absolutely your duty to buy from the arts because nobody else can afford to do it. So I'm not dissing rich people. They have a very, very important role to play in the arts. But like you, there's a celebration of life that comes through art that you do not get with anything else. You know?
No, I agree. Totally. And, I mean, you do have an amazing reputation, Scott, that all the people I've spoken to adore you.
They don't know me. They don't know me. Yeah.
You know, I think you bring something different through your gallery to the art world. What do you think it is that is different, and how do you think other gallerists view you and what you do?
The gallery scene's not particularly collegiate. It's quite weird. It's I find it quite a New Zealand thing actually. It's almost like people. It's like people want you to fail. It's really weird. It's like this. Yeah, you'd expect this sort of huge thing that's like we're all in it for the arts. Nobody's making any money. Let's support each other as an industry. And there's this really weird thing around like, you know, you try something new and people don't like it. They get quite upset by it. But I would like to think, amongst all the gallery peers that, you know, I have a huge respect for what they do because I think because now that I've seen what they do, I have nothing but respect for what they do on a daily basis because very, very few of them are, you know, driving Porsches at this stage. So I'd hope to think a modicum of respect that I'm doing a fairly decent job, but it's never been a big priority of mine. I didn't come from I've never run a gallery before, so I never knew really what I was doing, and I've made a heck of a lot of mistakes. But by framing it as a practice as opposed to a business, that's been very helpful for me because it's just like an artist where it's like, you know, you're going to have 3 people coming to your studio and critique your work. They're all going to have different opinions. You can't put too much emphasis when you run a gallery on what people think of you. If anything, what I think it has done is I think it's exposed the inequities of the system of the arts in New Zealand, which to me, from creative New Zealand right through to the institutions, needs completely blown up and restarted again with the artists at the heart and centre of everything.
Well, I think that you are on a mission to make changes in that area. You know?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah, and the way you celebrate young artists, emerging artists, I think is incredible. That
is incredibly rewarding that you go, you know, you got a bit of privilege, you got a bit of money, you got a bit, you know, I've gone through, I'm 52, I've kind of owned properties before, I still have a big mortgage and everything, but you think at the very least, give over some of that gallery space to people that would never normally have it. And one of the most recent shows, the Moana Arts show, that was curated by Sefton Rani, and we got a lot of community buy-in. I mean, 300 or 400 people came into that opening. One of the loveliest things, and now there was work in there that I, with my filter, would probably have never shown in the gallery, but I was a better person for it because it was shown. I took a real hands-off approach, and I said, no, Sefton, you're the curator, you bring people in, and I will show it. and I will show it to great effect. And it's the same way, I'll mark it in the same way as every other show. And gosh, that was an eye-opener for me. It was a very humbling experience for me that I said, it doesn't always have to be predetermined by me over what's good or what I think is interesting. I was hugely honoured by that show. I felt incredibly humbled by it, and I got really good feedback from people in the community. Marcus Hipper was on in the main gallery, and that was a really interesting one in itself. Marcus works on a building site, and then at night time goes home and does this work. And we had the lads, four lovely young men who came in, fluoro jackets, big muddy boots. I'll take my boots off at the door. And they came in. I could see they were lost when they walked in. They were sort of like, where the heck is this, And I made a beeline for them, and I said, come on, I'll show you around. And, you sort of make them feel a wee bit more comfortable, and you're sitting there going, I bet you wonder why you're here and all this bullshit around art and everything, but let me talk you through the show, You make them feel comfortable. The moments like that are really rewarding for me. Because if I had never got into the arts, thanks to a couple of fantastic school teachers, I don't think my life would have been as enriched as it was. And I try and offer that up. We're going to do Moana Artists 2023, actually. It's going to be an annual event now. And that opened up that we had people who'd been working as artists for 20, 30 years and had never shown on a gallery wall.
How amazing.
And that was a real joy, it was a real privilege
and
for us all.
And what do you mean by Moana artists?
So Moana is really interesting. I was using the term Pacifica quite a lot, and it was actually one of the Sefton Rani, who's Cook Islands, and he said to me, well, I think we're going to frame it as Moana, because we've got artists from all over the region up to Niue, Tonga, Samoa, Cook Islands. So they said we'd like to call it Moana artists, and it's a term I now use, Moana rather than Pacifica, which I think was a colonial construct. I'm not quite sure.
And that includes New Zealand, Pacific Island area.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
I feel, I remember saying to Andy Lelesawa when I said, I feel you've got to take me on your journey, because this is not my culture. This is not my background. I'm coming in as this white Scottish bloke into your domain, and you need to tell me what the protocols are and how I should act accordingly. And it was really lovely, because the Moana Artist Show was me at the bottom of that inverted pyramid. I was this wee thing at the bottom, and the community was up the top, and I thought, this is the way it needs to be. It was such an important insight for me, thinking, actually, I'm plankton in the great scheme of things, and you've got this hugely powerful, very colourful, very intelligent, and hugely ambitious culture that needs to have that. And Andy said to me later, and he said to me, he says, it's the first time a major dealer gallery has devoted the whole gallery to Moana artists. And I was like, and I thought he was kidding me. I said, there's no way. There must have been.
That is surprising.
I was quite surprised too.
That's great though, that you're doing it. And I love the idea of the annual show.
Aye, that's going to come up every year.
Yeah,
now.
That'd be amazing.
It's good. It's too important to not, and we'll have a different selection panel, and we'll have a different. 3 of those artists that came through, Loa and Sean Hill, and Linda Vailua. I'm gonna take them on and develop their work. I would never have experienced that work if they were not included in that show. I would never have heard about them, and that sounds brutal, but I just would have never had that connection to that community. And I remember going to bed that night. It was a long, long day. We'd put on food, we'd catered it and everything, and so many people to meet. And I remember going back, and that gave me a huge source of pride. I felt like I'd contributed something back to the country I lived in. That was a really nice
that's brilliant.
Feeling. Yeah,
that's
it's really
amazing.
good.
And you obviously love that part of your job, not just dealing with the artists, but the people.
The people. It's all about art's about people. Art's it's not about anything else. It's about human beings.
Yeah.
It's about connecting to other human beings physically. When they come in the gallery or through their work. And also broadening your horizons and giving you new perspectives into things that you would normally have not considered. We're only on the planet for what, 85 years if you're lucky, 90 years if you're really lucky. And, I've not got that much time. I've not got that much time to learn about other people as much as we would probably like. And that the purpose of turning up to an art gallery, and especially shows like Moana Artist, is you can learn so much. Every different work in that show told a different story, and it was a deeply personal story, and it was often intertwined with the culture of and the idea of home. And ideas of home to me are quite interesting. Do you have culture if you don't have land? So what happens when the sea level rises and a lot of these places are underwater?
Yeah.
Does the culture exist? Can we transfer that cultural sovereignty into a digital space where it will outlive a physical space?
That's true.
It's really interesting.
And I guess we better start thinking about letting you go.
Aye, I know. Sorry, I talked for too long.
No,
You're
not
have
at all.
A job, change that into that. Hack it any way you want. Edit
Oh,
it
no,
any way you
no.
want. Do
Look,
what you need to
I
do.
have loved our conversation. I feel like we could talk about so many more things, but I think it's been a really nice little glimpse of what you do and what you believe in. And I think a lot of our listeners will find it very useful. And just, in the way that they view a dealer gallery and how it fits into their practice.
Well, the instruction I would say at the end is come and visit, come and pop in. Whether you've ever been in a gallery or not, come in and pop in. Say you've listened to the podcast and come in and I'll give you a tour around and make gallery visitation a part of your... Galleries are always pleased to see you. They really are. The validation for the artist, as I said at the very beginning, is the work being seen. It's not to buy something. It's the work being seen. The artists will often say, was it busy in the gallery today? How many people saw the show? That's what's important to them.
Yeah.
Is, I've done this body of work for a year and a half, and did people see it?
Yeah. And how did they respond? So your beautiful gallery, Scott Lawrie Gallery, is in Coles Ave in Mount Eden.
Coles Ave at the Steelworks, yeah. Coles Ave is an invented street off Valley Road. It's at the Mount Eden village end, and you'll see a little lane called Coles Avenue on the lamppost. You trundle up there, there's 2 parking spaces. Can't miss the gallery. I'm in shed 10.
Okay, well, that is brilliant to know because I'm going to come and visit. And I'm sure a lot of people would love to come and see your gallery and meet you, Scott. So thank you very, very much for your time. You are a beautiful man, as I was told. And I really appreciate talking to you and hearing all your amazing ideas. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Most welcome. I'm delighted to any time.